Ethan Carter had worked his entire life for this. As a mechanical engineer, he had spent years saving every spare dollar, carefully planning for the day he could finally buy his dream home. And when he found it, a stunning two-story house in a quiet, upscale suburban neighborhood in Atlanta, he knew it was worth every sacrifice. It had everything he wanted: a spacious backyard, towering oak trees lining the streets, and most importantly, peace. The neighborhood was safe, well-maintained, and filled with respectable homeowners who took pride in their property. Sure, there was an HOA, but Ethan wasn't too worried. The rules were strict but manageable, mostly dealing with lawn maintenance, house colors, and trash can placements. Nothing unreasonable. For 2 years, everything was fine. Until now. The pool had been his passion project, something he had meticulously designed down to the last detail. A sleek infinity edge, programmable LED lighting, high-end filtration, his own personal oasis after long, grueling workdays. He had done everything by the book, securing all the proper permits, hiring licensed contractors, and even getting HOA approval before breaking ground. No corners were cut, no rules were bent. It was perfect. And then, as if summoned by the very sight of his completed masterpiece, Debbie Whitmore showed up at his door. Ethan had seen her around before, strutting through the neighborhood in designer athletic wear, always barking into her Bluetooth headset like she was running a Fortune 500 company. As the HOA president, she was a fixture in the community, someone everyone knew but few actually liked. Their interactions had been minimal, polite nods at best, forced pleasantries at worst. She had never paid him much attention. Not until now. The moment he opened the door, she greeted him with a practiced smile, the kind of expression that was just a little too wide, a little too forced. Ethan. "Hi, neighbor," she chirped, voice dripping with artificial sweetness. Ethan immediately felt his stomach tighten. Nothing good ever started with a greeting that cheerful. "I just had to stop by," she continued, tilting her head in a way that made him think of a car salesman about to close a deal. "The whole neighborhood's been talking about your gorgeous new pool. It's truly stunning." He nodded cautiously. "Thanks. I put a lot of work into it." "Oh, I can tell," she gushed. Then, almost seamlessly, her tone shifted into something a little more suggestive, a little too familiar. "And, you know, as HOA president, I'm always thinking about ways to bring our community together. Having such a beautiful pool just sitting here, unused for most of the day, well, it seems like such a waste, doesn't it?" Ethan's brow furrowed. "Not really. It's my pool." "Oh, of course. Of course." She waved a manicured hand as if brushing aside his concerns. "But just imagine, neighborhood pool parties, swimming lessons for the kids, water aerobics for the seniors. Wouldn't that be fabulous?" Ethan barely stopped himself from laughing. She couldn't be serious. "I'm sorry, but no. I designed this pool for me. It's private property." For a split second, just one, her smile faltered. Then it was back, only tighter now, stretched over something less friendly. "Oh, but Ethan," she purred, "as HOA president, I have certain discretionary powers when it comes to managing community resources. I'm sure we could work something out, perhaps a small monthly contribution to the HOA maintenance fund. That way everyone benefits." His entire body tensed. There it was. This wasn't a request. This was pressure, a thinly veiled shakedown, disguised as community spirit. He met her gaze evenly, his voice calm but firm. "Well, I appreciate the suggestion, Debbie," he said, forcing himself to sound polite, "but my answer is no." And that was the moment the mask slipped. Debbie's entire demeanor snapped in an instant. Gone was the syrupy sweetness, the fake charm. Her eyes darkened, her mouth pulling into a tight, angry line. "Listen here, you selfish little man," she hissed, stepping closer, jabbing a finger toward his chest. "Do you know who I am? I have connections all over this county. The HOA bylaws give me broad authority to act for the community's benefit, and I'm telling you, this pool needs to be shared. Don't make this difficult for yourself." Ethan had dealt with pushy people before, but this? This was something else entirely. Without another word, he shut the door in her face. Maybe not the most diplomatic move. But at that moment, he didn't care. He had no idea that he had just declared war. The first sign that something was off came the next morning when Ethan stepped outside to grab his mail. Stuffed between bills and advertisements was a crisp, printed document, a copy of the HOA bylaws, neatly folded, with certain sections highlighted in neon yellow. The phrases, community spirit, and shared resources, practically screamed at him from the page. His jaw tightened as he skimmed through it. Nowhere, absolutely nowhere, did it state that a homeowner could be forced to share personal property. This wasn't a legal notice, it was an intimidation tactic. A warning. Ethan shook his head, crumpling the paper in his fist before tossing it into the trash. If Debbie thought passive-aggressive paperwork would make him change his mind, she was in for a disappointment. But this was just the beginning. The next day, he noticed a change in the neighborhood's rhythm. It was subtle at first, a few unfamiliar faces strolling past his house more often than usual. Some slowed down, casting long glances at his backyard fence. A couple of them even paused outright, whispering amongst themselves before walking away. At first, Ethan dismissed it as paranoia. Maybe people were just curious about the pool. Maybe he was imagining things. Then, as he watched from his living room window, he saw something that erased all doubt. A middle-aged man, someone Ethan had never seen before, casually walked by, then suddenly stopped, took out his phone, and snapped a picture over the fence. Ethan's stomach twisted. That night, he installed security cameras. The footage confirmed what he had suspected. Throughout the following days, the so-called neighborhood watch turned into full-on surveillance. Debbie's group of HOA loyalists lingered around his property at all hours, pretending to be on casual walks while very obviously peering into his backyard. Some even came right up to his fence, pressing their noses against the wood slats, as if checking up on their soon-to-be community pool. Ethan wasn't sure whether to be angry or disturbed. This was insane. The next escalation came 3 days later, when Debbie herself returned, but this time, she wasn't alone. Ethan had just stepped outside to check his mailbox when he spotted her striding up his driveway, flanked by a middle-aged couple. They looked smug, their arms crossed, like they were about to negotiate a hostile takeover of a Fortune 500 company. "Ethan," Debbie greeted, her voice artificially bright. "I wanted to introduce you to Greg and Susan, two of our wonderful community members." Ethan didn't even bother to fake enthusiasm. "What do you want, Debbie?" Her eyes narrowed just a fraction before she recovered, still smiling that plastic smile. "Well," she continued, ignoring his obvious irritation, "we've been discussing our plans for the neighborhood, and we really feel that your pool could be such a wonderful addition to the community. Imagine all the happy kids, the summer barbecues, the sense of togetherness it would bring." Greg nodded eagerly. "Yeah, man, the HOA budget is tight, and we've always wanted a community pool. This would be the perfect solution." Ethan exhaled slowly, arms crossing over his chest. "You're joking." Debbie sighed like he was being difficult on purpose. "Ethan, this isn't just about you. The HOA is about fostering a sense of unity. You wouldn't want to be seen as selfish, would you?" Susan piped up, her voice sickly sweet. "Just think of all the children who would love to swim here." Ethan's patience was wearing dangerously thin. "Let me make this simple," he said, voice sharp and controlled. "This is my pool. I designed it. I paid for it. It's on my property. The answer is no. The fake friendliness vanished from Debbie's face. Her forced smile twitched. Ethan, she said, her tone now dangerously low, I was hoping we could handle this amicably. But as HOA president, I have certain discretionary powers. No, you don't, Ethan cut her off. His voice was firm, unwavering. I've read the bylaws. You have zero authority over my personal property. For the first time, Debbie's mask completely slipped. Her face darkened, her pleasant demeanor turning into something ugly and entitled. You really want to do this the hard way? She asked, stepping closer. Ethan tilted his head. Are you threatening me? She smiled again, but this time, there was nothing friendly about it. I'm saying, she murmured, that if you continue to be difficult, you will regret it. You have no idea how much influence I have. Ethan was done playing games. You and your little HOA fan club can stop wasting your time, he said flatly. The pool is private, and that's final. Debbie's expression twisted into fury. Without another word, she spun on her heel and stormed away, Greg and Susan trailing behind her like obedient lapdogs. Ethan watched them go, feeling a mix of irritation and amusement. He had stood his ground, but he had a feeling. This wasn't over. And he was right. The next move would be even worse. The war escalated faster than Ethan had expected. In the days following his last confrontation with Debbie, the petty harassment tactics ramped up. More bogus HOA violation notices arrived, now citing ridiculous infractions like excessive water usage and unauthorized exterior modifications, even though his pool had been approved months ago. The security footage caught more strangers lingering near his fence, some even measuring parts of his property like they were preparing for something. Then, one morning, he woke up to find a new HOA announcement posted on every neighborhood mailbox. Emergency community mandate passed. Requisition of neighborhood assets for public benefit. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as he read the next line. To promote unity and shared resources, the HOA board has voted to designate the pool at 1845 Maplewood Drive as a community resource, available for supervised neighborhood events and recreational activities. His address. Ethan's fists clenched. The vote had happened without his knowledge, no notification, no input from him, just an arbitrary decision to take over his property. Oh, hell no. Before he could even process the full extent of their audacity, he heard laughter coming from his backyard. His stomach dropped. Ethan sprinted through his house, throwing open the back door. And stopped dead in his tracks. Debbie was in his yard. She wasn't alone. 3 other HOA members stood by the pool, fully dressed in swimsuits. One of them was inflating a pool float, another was setting up a cooler full of drinks, and Debbie herself stood at the head of the group, sunglasses perched on her nose, arms crossed like she owned the place. For a split second, Ethan's brain refused to process what he was seeing. What the hell? His voice was sharp, cutting through the early morning air like a blade. Debbie turned toward him calmly, like he was the one trespassing. Oh, Ethan, relax, she said, her tone breezy. We're just getting things set up. The HOA has officially requisitioned your pool for community use. It's going to be such a wonderful summer. Ethan felt his blood pressure spike. You did what? Debbie smiled, holding up a printed document, probably another fake policy she had cooked up. The board has determined that your pool is a valuable neighborhood asset. Denying access goes against the spirit of our HOA. Ethan took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. You don't have the authority to do this. This is private property, you are all trespassing. Debbie sighed, as if he were a child throwing a tantrum. Ethan, you really should learn to be more cooperative. This could have been so much easier. Ethan didn't waste another second. He pulled out his phone, hit record, and pointed it straight at her. "This is private property," he said loud and clear. "You are all trespassing. I am recording this. If you don't leave in the next 10 seconds, I am calling the police." Debbie laughed. "Go ahead," she said, flipping her hair. "Because I'm calling them too." For a second, Ethan thought he had misheard her. "Excuse me?" Debbie's smug grin widened. "I'm reporting you for illegally restricting community resources. Let's see whose side the police take." Ethan stared at her, genuinely stunned by the insanity of what he had just heard. Then, right in front of him, she pulled out her phone. And actually dialed 911. Unbelievable. Ethan's hands shook with rage as he dialed 911 himself. "Yes, I need officers here ASAP," he said, his voice tight with fury. "I have multiple trespassers on my private property. They refuse to leave and are attempting to illegally use my pool." Debbie, still on her own call, smirked at him. "You're going to regret this," she mouthed. Ethan had never been more tempted to throw someone into his pool. Within minutes, 2 squad cars pulled up to his driveway, lights flashing. By this time, a small crowd of nosy neighbors had gathered, drawn by the commotion. As the officers stepped out, Debbie sprang into action, rushing toward them like a victim seeking refuge. "Oh, thank God you're here, officers," she wailed dramatically, her eyes suspiciously glassy. "This man, he's hoarding community resources, he's creating a hostile environment, he's refusing to let the neighborhood use a shared pool that belongs to all of us." Ethan let out a sharp laugh. "Officers, they broke into my backyard. I have security footage of them climbing through the gate and setting up like this is a public pool. I also have my property deed, my HOA approval, and every permit showing this is a private pool, ***. The officers exchanged looks. "You have security footage?" one of them asked. "Absolutely." Ethan nodded. "And I'd love to show it to you." For the first time, Debbie's smug expression faltered. One officer turned to her. "Ma'am, did you and these other individuals enter his property without permission?" Debbie's face turned red. "We had a vote," she sputtered. "The HOA decided this pool is a community resource, it's in our bylaws, I have discretionary powers to enforce policies." The officer sighed. "Ma'am, unless those bylaws explicitly state that the HOA can confiscate private property, which I highly doubt, then you and these individuals are trespassing." Another officer pointed at the 3 women still in swimsuits, who now looked deeply uncomfortable. "Did you enter this property willingly?" The 3 of them nodded hesitantly. One of them dropped her pool float like it was a crime scene weapon. The officer turned back to Debbie. "All right, ma'am, here's the deal. You and your friends are trespassing on private property. That alone is a chargeable offense. On top of that, you called 911 under false pretenses, which could also be considered filing a false police report." Debbie's mouth fell open. Ethan folded his arms, enjoying every second of her downfall. The officer exhaled. "I suggest you leave immediately before this turns into something worse." The 3 HOA women didn't need to be told twice. They grabbed their things and bolted, muttering apologies as they hurried out of the backyard. Debbie, however, was still fuming. "This is an injustice," she screeched. "This is exactly why we need stronger HOA control. Selfish homeowners like him ruin everything." The officer took a step closer, voice firm. "Ma'am. Leave now or spend the night in a holding cell, your choice." For the first time since this ordeal started, Debbie looked genuinely nervous. She huffed, spun on her heel, and stormed out. As she stomped toward the street, she furiously typed on her phone, probably sending a mass email to the entire HOA about her horrible mistreatment. Ethan smirked. She had lost this battle. But he had a feeling. The war wasn't over. Ethan thought, for one brief moment, that the worst was behind him. Debbie had been humiliated, caught trespassing, and nearly arrested. The HOA had been publicly embarrassed in front of the entire neighborhood. She had slinked away that night, too furious to fight back. But Ethan had underestimated just how deep her arrogance ran. The retaliation came swiftly. The first sign was when he received a notice from the HOA in the mail, a thick, official-looking envelope marked urgent, HOA legal matter. He opened it, skimming through the contents, his jaw tightening with every word. The letter informed him that an amendment had been made to the HOA bylaws stating that community assets could not be removed or sold without HOA board approval. His address was explicitly mentioned. His pool, the one he had legally built, was being retroactively designated as a neighborhood asset. The meaning was clear: if Ethan ever decided to sell his house, the HOA could block the sale unless he negotiated terms regarding the pool. He clenched his fists. They were trying to trap him. Before he could even process that outrage, the next hit landed. A few days later, Ethan reached out to a real estate agent, just to explore the idea of selling his home and escaping this madness. The response was immediate and chilling. "Mr. Carter, I'd love to help, but I need to let you know up front, your property is currently flagged as being under an HOA dispute. Until that's cleared, I legally can't list your home." Ethan froze. "What do you mean, flagged?" The agent sighed. "I received a notification this morning from the HOA legal committee stating that your property has pending legal actions related to its use as a shared community space. That means any sale could be delayed or even blocked." Ethan's grip on his phone tightened. "You've got to be kidding me." "I wish I was." The agent sounded genuinely sympathetic. "You'd have to get the HOA to withdraw the complaint before I can list your house." Ethan hung up, seething. They had done it. They had effectively blacklisted his home, not because they wanted to buy it, but because they wanted to force him into compliance. And they weren't done. The very next morning, a county inspector showed up at his door. "Sir, I'm here to conduct a zoning and safety compliance check on your property." Ethan exhaled slowly, keeping his voice calm. "And why exactly was this scheduled?" "Well," the inspector said, flipping through his notes, "we received an anonymous complaint about possible zoning violations regarding an unregistered recreational facility." Ethan nearly laughed out loud. "Let me guess," he said dryly, "someone told you my private pool was a public amenity?" The inspector gave him an apologetic look. "Something like that. Look, Mr. Carter, I've seen this kind of thing before. If you have all your permits in order, I'll be in and out." Ethan led him through the process, pulling up every document, permit, and approval letter. Everything was 100% legal. After a thorough inspection, the inspector found nothing wrong. But before leaving, he warned Ethan. "Just so you know, even though this complaint was baseless, it's now on file. If they keep pushing, they could eventually lobby the city to review your property status. Be careful." That was all Ethan needed to hear. The HOA wasn't just trying to take his pool, they were trying to weaponize the legal system against him. And then came the final insult. That night, Ethan got a notification from the HOA's official website. A new, community fundraiser had been launched. He clicked the link, brows furrowing as he read the banner at the top of the page. "Help US secure a true community pool." Beneath it was a photo of his backyard. His blood boiled as he read the details of the campaign. The HOA had unilaterally launched a fundraiser to buy his pool, without his consent. The goal? Raise enough money to compensate him so that the HOA could take full control and allow all residents to enjoy it. It was listed as pending HOA purchase. Ethan leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen in disbelief. They weren't even asking him. They had already decided the pool was no longer his. When he finally confronted Debbie, she smirked like she had won. "Well," she said smoothly, "we just assumed you'd eventually come around once the money was good enough." Ethan didn't even bother responding. Instead, he went home, compiled every piece of evidence, and called his lawyer. He was done playing nice. If Debbie and the HOA wanted a war, they were about to get one. Ethan didn't waste another second. That night, he compiled every piece of evidence: security footage, fake violation notices, the bogus community pool fundraiser, and the trespassing police report. By the next morning, he had sent a formal cease and desist letter to the HOA board, warning that if the harassment continued, he would be taking legal action against both the association and Debbie personally. But he didn't stop there. He filed an official complaint with the county, detailing how Debbie had used false reports to weaponize local authorities against him. The HOA board, now facing potential lawsuits and an investigation, had no choice but to hold an emergency meeting. Ethan walked into that meeting fully prepared, carrying a binder filled with documented proof. The room was packed. Residents who had long been frustrated with the HOA's overreach showed up in full force, eager to witness the showdown. Debbie arrived, her usual smugness replaced with barely concealed panic. She had brought her own binder, undoubtedly filled with more nonsense about community resources and HOA discretionary powers. But before she could even begin, Ethan calmly laid out his case: the fake fines, the property sabotage, the false police report, the illegal fundraiser, and the clear violation of private property laws. The HOA board members exchanged uneasy glances. Some of them had clearly never realized how deep Debbie's corruption ran. One board member, a retired attorney, finally spoke up, pointing to a section of the HOA bylaws Ethan had printed out. It explicitly stated that board members who create legal liability for the HOA could be immediately removed. And just like that, a vote was taken. 6-1. Debbie was officially removed as HOA president. The one vote in her favor? Hers. As the decision was announced, Debbie shot up from her seat, shaking with rage. "This is an outrage. You're all turning against me for trying to bring unity to this neighborhood." The room stayed silent. She turned her glare to Ethan. "This isn't over. You'll regret this." But it was over. Within days, Debbie's entire house was put up for sale. Word spread quickly. She had threatened lawsuits against the HOA, but when she realized that the legal fees would come out of her own pocket, she backed down and ran. The new HOA president, a retired judge with actual legal knowledge, visited Ethan personally to apologize. "That was a disaster," he admitted, shaking his head. "We're reviewing all the violations Debbie issued in the last 2 years, and, well, let's just say a lot of people are getting refunds." Ethan smirked. Sounds like the HOA might actually become tolerable for once. To celebrate Debbie's downfall, Ethan decided to throw a pool party. A real one. But this time, it was by invitation only. No HOA interference, no ridiculous bylaws, just good food, cold drinks, and laughter. As he stood by the grill, flipping burgers, one of his neighbors chuckled. "So, do we think Debbie's ever coming back?" Ethan raised his drink, grinning. "Not a chance. The neighborhood was finally free." But it makes you wonder, how many other HOA presidents out there are abusing their power just like Debbie did? Have you ever felt powerless against an HOA or a Karen in charge? Share your stories below. Let's see who had it worse.